Good afternoon. Hope you're having a beautiful day. Today is a very special day in the Chabad calendar. And not only in the Chabad calendar, but the truth is in the Jewish calendar because of the impact it had on world Jewry. Today is the 13th day of Tammuz. In 1920, Joseph Stalin, Yimach Shemoyim, may his name be erased, took over from 1924, he took over from Lenin, who had died, and went on one of the most brutal campaigns ever to eradicate religion and to suppress any form of entity that held itself differently than his dream of communism for the world. Stalin killed 50 million of his own people. One of his prime targets was the Jewish people. In fact, he had a special group within the KGB, which was called the Yevesiekze, which was Jewish informers who would spy on the Jews and help him eradicate any Jews who didn't conform to his way of communism and held on to their religion. And there was one man that stood up to Joseph Stalin, and that man was also named Joseph, and he was Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, Rabbi Joseph Isaac Schneerson, the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, who from 1920 through 1930, with his famous pact he made with his Chassidim, with Mayara Dadmura, the army of the Rebbe, that they would, under even the penalty of death, they would not give up on Judaism. They brought mikvahs, ritual baths, and shochtim, slaughterhouses, and they brought yeshivas, and they brought education and shuls to Jewish people. In fact, between the 1920s and the 1930s, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Joseph Isaac Schneerson, and his Chassidim opened up 600 yeshivas in Russia. Some of them only lasted a few weeks, because the moment the Russians would catch it, they would close it down, they would send the students home, and they would imprison the teachers and the leaders. In fact, many of you might know that my own grandfather sat in prison for 2 years under Stalin's regime because he was caught in one of these underground yeshivas. He was the dean. But all this came to a halt in 1927, when in the middle of a Jew night, in the middle of the night specifically, wagons descended on the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Joseph Isaac Schneerson's home, and took him to one of the worst prisons in Russia called Shpalerke, which wasn't even like, it made Rikers Island look like a heaven. And that our previous Rebbe was taken to prison where he was persecuted and interrogated and sentenced to death. And then on the 3rd of Tammuz, the previous Rebbe, his sentence was commuted, which was a tremendous miracle because people far lesser than what he did were killed. His sentence was commuted to exile, and then to 10 days of exile in Kostroma, where he was notified on the 12th of Tammuz, which was yesterday, that he would be released the next day. And then today, in 1927, the previous Rebbe was released from prison. And it became a day of celebration where we celebrate that strength, that courage from the previous Rebbe, but the truth is from Jews all over the world, to stand up even to a dictator and a tyrant that the world never saw a tyrant like him, like Joseph Stalin. And therefore we celebrate this remarkable day. And when we look around, even our own community, you think about Chestnut Hill, and we think about the Russian Jews in our community and their love and devotion for Judaism and their connection to Judaism, and you think how Stalin tried to rip it away from them. But the previous Rebbe, all on his own, led a revolution against Joseph Stalin. Today, Joseph Stalin is nowhere to be heard of. But the previous Rebbe, his mission, Judaism, thrives and continues to grow. And it reminds me of this week's Torah portion, because in this week's Torah portion, we read the prophecy of Bilam. Bilam was a prophet of the Gentiles who wanted to come curse the Jews. He wanted fame, he wanted money, and he thought he would get the two of them if he cursed the Jewish people, which he went on to try to do, but the Almighty didn't let him. And he ends up blessing the Jewish people. And some of the words he tells us, we say many, many times. Every morning we say Matovu, Alecha Yaakov, etc., etc. But I want to touch on another verse which connects to who the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, was. Bilam says, Kara shachav ka'ari. He crouches like a lion, and like a lioness, who will dare to arouse him? Who will dare to wake him up? And the Rebbe, in one of his talks, asks a question, why is he comparing us to a lion, and why does he speak about us crouching, and who will dare to wake us up? What's the significance? And the Rebbe says something very fascinating. In the Code of Jewish Law that was written 1,000 years ago, it tells us the law that all animals could possibly be domesticated. If you have a goat, or if you have a cow, and you domesticate it, you train it, and then it goes on to injure somebody, the question is how much you domesticated and trained it to see how liable you are. But the Code of Jewish Law 1,000 years ago says something that should be a message to all those who train lions and lionesses. That a lion by nature could never be domesticated, could never be trained, because by the self-nature of who a lion and a lioness is, they don't accept any yoke upon them. They are kings of the forest, and they don't let anyone rule them. So sometimes, by their own will maybe, they might subjugate themselves for 5 years, for 10 years. But at the end of the day, they're a lion and a lioness. And that's how you've seen in the news over the past 10, 20 years of people who had a lioness or a lion, and they trained them. And for 5 years, everything was good. And then one day, the lion woke up and devoured its owner. Because at the end of the day, they can never be domesticated. That's what the Code of Jewish Law tells us. And the Rebbe says that was the message of Bilam. You see, throughout our exile, the Jewish people, over the past 2,000 years, we've seen meek sometimes, we've seen domesticated onto the world who will tell us what to do and how to do, and we've seen that we've taken it, we've accepted it. But Bilam reminds the world that the Jewish people is Kara Shachav Ka'ari. We are like a lion, and like a lioness, who will dare to arouse us? We might be domesticated by our own will, but never underestimate the strength, the power, the pride of the Jewish people. This is what the previous Rebbe represented. The story of the Jewish heart and pride that never ceases to exist. You think about what we've been through, yet at the same time you remember that we always have persevered and grown stronger. When the previous Rebbe was on his way to exile in Kastroman, the 3rd of Tammuz, he said that the train station, the Chassidim came to meet him. This was the middle of exile. He had just been finished, commuted from death sentence to prison. And he said that not by our will did we leave the holy land of Israel. We were exiled by God. And not by our will we will be returned. Hashem will return us. He said, but then he turned to the nations of the world and he says, but don't make a mistake. Don't think that our bodies were sent into exiles, but the soul of a Jew was never sent into exile. The soul of a Jew is always proud, is always like a lion and a lioness, always proud to be a Jew, to serve Hashem, to be a light upon the nations. And that's the message. You know, there was a famous chassid who came from a Chassidic family who became part of the Yevsiekset, became part of the informers for Stalin. And he ended up being an interrogator of the previous Rebbe. His name was Lulav. And he actually hurt the Frierdiker Rebbe physically. Took the barrel of his gun and he hit him. And he tortured him a lot. And one time when he was interrogating him, he pointed his gun at him because the previous Rebbe wasn't saying what he wanted him to say. And he said, aren't you afraid of the gun? And the previous Rebbe looked at Lulav and he said, no. Only someone who has many gods in one world is afraid of a gun. But someone who has one God and more than one world is not afraid of the gun. And that's the message of the Jewish people. You know, we're in the middle of the 3rd week at Gan Yisrael, Chestnut Hill. And it's amazing to go to camp every day and to see. I know it seems quiet here. I'm not at camp now, but every day we're at camp and there's over 200 kids on a weekly basis and over 250 throughout the summer. And every day you see 3, 4 buses coming to pick up the kids and to take them to places. And the kids sing a song that we've taught them, which really speaks to me. And it says, I'm a Jew and I'm proud and I'll sing it out loud. Because forever that's what I'll be. Jewish people are supposed to be proud. Because at the end of the day, we're a lion, we're a lioness. And even when we crouch, and even when we're subdued, that's by our own choosing, our own nature. But by the nature of who we are, we're kings and we're princes and princesses. And we're the children of God who bring monotheism and moral and ethical values to the world. Don't ever underestimate our power. God bless you and have a great day. Go change the world.